Welcome to the Organ Podcast from the Royal College of Organists with me, Mark O'Brien. Coming up, I spend an afternoon at King's College, Cambridge with BBC Radio 3, going behind the scenes of a live broadcast of Choral Evensong. And I talk to Gordon Stewart as he demonstrates one of his favourite organs, the Binns organ at Rochdale Town Hall.
Everything is so well voiced that it just changes to fit in with whatever style you're playing. I really do believe this is one of the great organs.
Well, it's coming up to midday and I'm just walking along the side of the lawn next to the chapel here at King's College, Cambridge, and I'm following the trail of some rather heavy-duty black cables that are coming out of a small window just to the side of the chapel here and are running along the ground towards the back of a BBC outside broadcast vehicle. And all of this means that it's Wednesday, and very shortly rehearsals will start in preparation for a live broadcast of Choral Evensong on BBC Radio 3. And if I just make my way up the steps of the sound vehicle and open the very heavy-duty soundproof door, make my way in and try and close the door again. Inside, sitting in front of a very elaborate mixing desk, is the producer of Choral Evensong, Ben Collingwood, and BBC Sound Supervisor Simon Tyndall. And they're looking very relaxed and calm, considering I think we've got about 3 hours to go before they're live on air. Ben, what have you got to do between now and then?
Over the next 2 hours or so, we have rehearsals. So today the choir are coming in. Got about an hour and a half with them. And a lot of that is running through each item so I can get a timing on it. And Dan Hyde, the Director of Music here at King's, may have various things that he wants to tidy up. And there may be things that I want to tidy up as well, just to make it sound perfect for broadcast. And then we have the organ voluntary run through, again, to get a timing on it. And then some speech rehearsals so we can check that that's all working from a technical perspective and in the building.
Well, Simon, am I right in thinking actually that the run-through, from your point of view, is probably a little bit more important than the actual live broadcast?
Well, I wouldn't say more important, but obviously you've got to do the groundwork at that point. We need to get microphones in the right place, not only so that they work for the rehearsal, but also so you know you've got other options should the service itself sound slightly different. The choir may be saving themselves a little bit, so the balance may change. You put some people in the building and the acoustic dries up a little bit. So it's good to get microphones in the right place at this point, not only to capture the sound as it is now, but to know that we can open it out a bit or close it down a bit, or maybe just tweak slightly the balance between the front row and the back row, should that actually change during the service. And also, as backup, it's a live broadcast. We don't have a chance to go back and do it again. So if a microphone fails, I need to know that there's something else I can fade up in its place.
Well, I don't want to hold you up because I can see on the monitor behind you the choir are just about to come in to start the rehearsal. So I'll get out of your way. Hope to catch up with you later. But Ben, Simon, thanks very much. I've come inside the chapel now, and I'm just sitting at the back of the choir stalls, just a few feet away from the choristers, who have just arrived and are getting their music in order. Daniel Hyde, the Director of Music here at King's, is taking his place in front of them, while a few BBC sound engineers are adjusting the positions of 3 quite large microphone stands, which are about 10 or 12 feet high. And they're also just taping down some of the cables to keep them out of the way. And it looks like the rehearsal is about to start. Of course, the choir here are used to all manner of recordings and broadcasts from this chapel. But I wonder, for Director of Music Daniel Hyde, if a broadcast of Choral Evensong for Radio 3 is particularly special.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. There's always something special about a broadcast because you're bringing what you do every day to the people who are here in the chapel to a much wider congregation and audience. So there's always that frisson of excitement as to who's listening, and you can't see them, but you kind of know they're there.
And presumably it's something you've been listening to, probably as a child, I suspect.
Yeah, I remember the various stages through which Choral Evensong has gone on Radio 3, different times, different days, all that sort of stuff. And of course I remember as a chorister myself at Durham when I was a boy. I remember doing Choral Evensong, and that was a big highlight of the calendar, and of course it sort of carries on here.
And as Director of Music here at King's, how do you approach choosing the music? Because astonishingly, you sing Choral Evensong here every day, 7 days a week. When it's a broadcast like this, are you tempted to sort of bring out the musical family silver, or is it business as usual? What's on, the monthly music list?
I think it's more business as usual. It's not so much of a let's make a big cracking, concert performance for us. What I try and do, we're lucky that Radio 3 tend to come once every year for a Choral Evensong, so I try and alternate. One year I might do significantly earlier repertoire. The next year, as in this year, I might do repertoire which really throws the organ around. I think it's important that the organ scholars during their time get those different kind of broadcast experience. And I take the view that the radio is kind of dropping in on what we do every day. We're not putting on a big show with all the bells and whistles for the radio. They just happen to be eavesdropping today.
Well, to eavesdrop, as Daniel Hyde puts it, on different venues all over the country, must take quite a bit of planning for producer Ben Collingwood.
We broadcast almost every Wednesday in the year, and then an additional service live on Easter Day. So pretty much it's 53 broadcasts a year. What I try to do is to get as broad a geographical spread as we possibly can to represent the length and breadth of the UK.
But from your point of view, there's a quality threshold because it's on Radio 3 and you're representing the best of choral music in that sense. How do you keep in touch or keep up to date with basically who's good and what they're doing? What's the sort of the criteria for you in terms of working out the schedule of who appears on Choral Evensong?
Well, as you say, I think the quality is the most important thing. If you think of where Choral Evensong sits within the schedule, you may have an afternoon of some of the finest orchestras and choirs from across the UK and across Europe and the world, and the quality of Choral Evensong has to sit beside that as well. So that is a very important thing. In terms of keeping up to date with things, I think there are a number of ways of doing that. One, I go to lots of places quite frequently just to see how things are sounding on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, when I've got a broadcast somewhere on a Wednesday, I might, on my way there or in the same city, go to a different venue on a Tuesday afternoon. So I'm sort of constantly keeping an eye on how different choirs are sounding.
You're like the mystery shopper of the church.
A little bit,
people see in the
yes.
back row, and actually they're being auditioned on the side for Choral Evensong.
And considering I now know quite a lot of people who work in those institutions, fortunately there's not the sort of sense of fear on their faces when they walk in and see me in the congregation. So I think there's that. There's also talking to people who are in that world, and a lot of my job is primarily about relationships with people. So if I can't go to a service, but I know other people who I trust have, then I can ask them about how certain choirs are sounding. You get a feel for how things are, which is important as well.
You must get a lot of repetition. A lot of cathedrals or churches will want to put, the best canticles up or the most interesting anthem. Is that quite tricky when having to sort of be fair in terms of who can sing what and when?
I think that most places are very understanding of that. And because Choral Evensong on the BBC has been going for such a long time, they understand that we can't repeat Stamford A every week. There needs to be that variety across the year. And so normally if there's a piece of music that I know we've had recently or has already been planned elsewhere, I will go back to director's music and say, look, really sorry, any chance of something else instead? Then people are very understanding of that. It's all about keeping those relationships going and having those discussions about what will and won't work.
And probably one of the most important aspects of that relationship between producer and director of music must be during the rehearsal and the actual live broadcast itself. So how does that work from people like Daniel Hyde's point of view?
Well, one has to have a lot of trust in one's producer, and Ben Collingwood is a very skilled producer because he understands what I'm trying to do on the floor, and he knows that I understand what he and his engineers are trying to do in terms of making it sound as good as they can to capture the building and so on. So it's a two-way street. If Ben tells me that something needs a little bit of work, it may be that that's how it sounds down the mics in a way that doesn't quite sound like that to me. So I take him on trust, and I will then put into the rehearsal what he tells me he needs, just as I might actually ask him, does that come across to you in that way, or do you need a little bit more there, perhaps more so than we might think in the building? Ben, can you tell me, in terms of balance with the organ, when Paul has the earth trembled and quaked and a lot of pedal on, does it suddenly jolt to you?
No, not at all. No.
Fine. So can we just... So there's a huge degree of trust, because I have to know that he's going to be representing the choir as best he can, and that's what production's about. I think it's a really detailed relationship, and I've done many of these with Ben, and he understands what to say and what not to say. I think that's quite important.
My feeling is that I don't want to try to change people's interpretation of a piece. I see my job as really just fine-tuning things. So, for example, if there are entries that aren't together, if there are certain bits of ensemble that are not quite right, perhaps between the two sides, if the choir's singing antiphonally, if there are bits of tuning that needs just adjusting, maybe. So I think it's more of those sorts of things that I will try and help the choir with.
But is that quite a discipline for you, I suppose, in the musical side? Are there moments where you think, oh, I'd like a much longer writ on that, or, we could pull back on this, we'll have a bigger crescendo? Is that something you kind of have to sort of sit on your hands and say, right, no, let that go to the MD? Or are there areas where you think you can sort of improve it?
I think that if there are things that are written in the score that aren't coming across to me when I listen, then that is something that I would say. So, for example, if there were some lovely hairpins, crescendos, diminuendos in certain phrases written into an anthem or so on, and if I had my eyes closed and I couldn't tell that was happening without looking at the score, then that's probably something that I would comment on.
Let's move on to the non-committed.
Mr. Hyde, just before you move on, just a couple of tiny things for me in addition, if that's okay. Yeah. Generally sounds lovely. I realise you're saving yourselves for later, but things like that verse bit bottom of page 10, it just feels like it did a little bit more rise and fall. So I know you're saving yourselves, but I think just bear that in mind. It all sounded sort of piano rather than the hairpins that are marked.
At the end of the page in particular.
But if there was a change of dynamic or a certain interpretation, in particularly things like early music where there aren't any dynamics or any sense of performance markings, I wouldn't say, actually, I think you should do it this way because that's how I would do it. I think that's very much down to the director of music at the place where we are to make those decisions.
Well, I'm just walking my way down to the back of the chapel towards the great west window, probably about as far away from the choir as you can get while still being in the building. And it's incredible the amount of sound you can hear, even from this point. The choir literally washing over the screen and the organ case. And I guess this raises the question, when balancing sound for a broadcast like this, as to what perspective you want the listener to have. Well, crucial to this are the ears and skill of someone like Simon Tyndall, who is the BBC Sound Supervisor for today's broadcast.
We're trying to make it sound as if like the best seat in the house. It needs to sound as if you're in the building experiencing the service. In the case of the one we're covering today, it is a live act of worship, and we're trying to bring it to people's homes fairly similar to how it would be in the building if they were here. Often it might sound, we hope, a little better in that the listener will get the clarity, especially of the spoken parts. But we're trying to get a blend of the overall service so that it sounds like a service and not a kit of parts, and certainly not like a studio production. You know, somewhere just behind the conductor is a good place to start with a balance, but things do vary, and the microphones pick things up slightly differently from how you would hear if you were stood there.
And when you say the balance somewhere behind the conductor, you mean that's where you want the listener at home to feel that they're positioned listening to the choir, standing somewhere behind the conductor?
Yeah, because the conductor will balance the choir against the organ and the parts against one another so that they sound right where he or she is standing. So that's a very good starting point. You don't want it to sound as direct as it would do behind the conductor, because the conductor very often, as Dan Hyde is in this case, is standing right in the middle of the choir, and that is very immediate. So you want it to feel as if it's in the building, but certainly starting with a pair of microphones just behind the conductor, you're going to generally get a pretty good overall balance.
Something like this, Choral Evensong, it does have a lot of scrutiny about the balance, whether, you're eavesdropping on the service or, you're in the front row or with the conductor listening. In your mind, what do you kind of have in your head as a perfect balance or an ideal balance for a Choral Evensong broadcast?
I want to be sitting in the best seat in the house. I want to be able to hear all the parts. I want to be able to hear the organ supporting the choral pieces. I want to be able to hear the spoken word, but not so that it sounds like someone sat in front of me. They should sound as if they're in the acoustic of the building. I'm trying to capture an overall blend of all the elements, but as if you were sat in the best seat in the chapel and hearing it for real.
So is that a better blend now?
I think it's definitely getting that. Obviously, it'd be a bit. Just need to make sure we're in a decent place of when the back row are giving it a little bit more later. So I think just if we've got enough to be able to come away from it as well a little bit, then I think that'd be really helpful.
We've also the spot mics in the middle. I've just got Andy to lower those a bit to give us more of the treble. So if we find we're lacking them, we can.
And whilst Simon and his team are positioning mics and, of course, adjusting their balance from the mixing desk in the BBC van, producer Ben is sitting right next to him and listening to the whole thing on headphones.
I'm trying to make sure that we've got a good balance on the choir. So in terms of perspective on the different parts. So you think that the back rows are further away from the main microphones than the front rows are. So it's a sense of, have we got that balance right? So do we need a little bit more from the back row to provide that sense of foundation for the choristers? Is there enough organ in the balance? Is the organ clear enough? Is the clarity on there? Are we hearing the range of sounds that Paul Greeley, the organ scholar, is getting from the organ? Does the organ sound closer in the mix than the choir does? So those are the sorts of things that I'm thinking about. And we've got an hour and a half or so in the rehearsal to maybe move microphones around and try things in a slightly different perspective. We're trying to get ourselves in a position where we can make things work in the live broadcast.
Well, Ben, we're halfway through the rehearsal right now. How's it looking in terms of the timing?
As usual, things are a little bit longer than I was expecting. So, for example, the Director of Music send through a form which has all the timings on it that they've done, and most of the time it's roughly right, but sometimes there's a little bit of a difference between what's on the form and the timings in the rehearsal. So, for example, I was expecting the psalm to be around 9 minutes, but it's actually close to 13.
Well, that's quite a bit over. What are you going to do?
Well, we had got a hymn in reserve just in case we were under, so we'll probably just have to cut that.
And they won't mind. That'll be okay.
It'll have to be. We can't run over.
So what do you do? Because presumably somebody in Radio 3 is waiting to carry on with the rest of the day. Do you give them advance notice? What happens when you think you're going to be over or under?
Fortunately, in most places, we do a run-through of the organ voluntary well in advance. That's quite often one of the first things we do in the rehearsal. So as soon as we've done that, I've got a timing on that, and we'll be in touch with the producer in the continuity studio. And so as soon as that starts at the end of the service, they know that they have got 7.5 minutes or whatever it might be to work out how much time they've got before the next programme starts. At the moment, there is absolutely no option of going overtime. So the programme that starts after us, Composer of the Week, starts automatically whatever happens. So it's much better to be a little bit under and for the continuity studio to be able to fill that time than it is to go over, and it's the Radio 4 equivalent of crashing the pips. You can't do it. And we like to hear the organ voluntary in full on Radio 3, and we wouldn't want to have to fade that out.
Well, I think we've got about 10 minutes or so before we go on air, so I'm just sneaking up to the organ loft to talk to someone who's got quite a prominent role in all of this, and that's the organ scholar, Paul Creeley. So, Paul, what's most stressful for you? Is it the anthem and the canticles or the organ voluntary?
Well, I'd say it's actually the psalm. There's so much that I have to do that's not written down, all kinds of inversions and counter melodies and descants and things that I have to kind of remember. And it's quite a lot of verses that all will probably sound the same to a punter, but there's so many intricate things going on downstairs and upstairs that are quite difficult really.
And you've got to register quite a lot between verses. Presumably you're giving the colour.
Yes, exactly. So an organist in a psalm kind of paints the words.
But can you hear up here? Is it very easy to do that when you've got to be so precise in a psalm?
Well, in King's especially, you have to play a split second ahead of what you hear because the room is so huge and the acoustic is so wonderful that the sound actually gets to you quite a lot longer after they utter the sound. So I've got to be quite good at predicting when they change and just doing it slightly before the beat.
Now, presumably you're quite used to that. You've been playing here most days, I suspect, for the last couple of years. When it's a live broadcast, are you nervous or do you take it in your stride now?
I think it actually varies with the occasion. The most recent broadcast I did, I was cool as a cucumber, and then other times it's been, perhaps because of the circumstances or the weather even, a little bit more exhilarating. I try not to label nerves as anxiety, but more excitement.
And you're in your final year here at King's, is that right?
Yes, so I did the usual 3 years as an organ scholar would do with my undergraduate music degree, and then I was lucky enough to stay for a 4th year with the choir doing a master's degree, an MPhil in music.
And so does that mean then that this is your last, I mean, it may not be your swan song, but your last broadcast?
This is definitely my last broadcast playing the organ at King's.
And you did the big 9 lessons and carols last year?
I did it last year, the year before that, and the year before that. So
you're an old hand.
I've
you
definitely
really
had my fill.
Are you going to miss it?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no place quite like this, but moving on, hopefully there'll be new challenges and excitements.
And what are your plans? Are you going in the direction of church cathedral music or what?
Well, I'm now going to the Royal Academy of Music for a 2-year, it's called an MA in organ performance, and I'm very excited to combine that with the organ scholarship at Westminster Abbey.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes. So, from one amazing building to another, I'm very pleased with.
Well, I can hear they're just doing the final touches to the readings, I think, or the speech rehearsals downstairs. I'll let you get on with it, but Paul Creeley, thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for talking to me.
Just trying to talk back.
It might be nice if that red just dragged out very slightly so I can see it on the camera for reassurance.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see that. Thank you.
So the time has come. It's a few seconds before 3 o'clock, and I'm back in the van. The red light is flashing in the chapel, and we're about to go live on air.
On FM, on digital, and on your smart speaker. This is BBC Radio 3. It's 3 o'clock, so time now for Choral Evensong, which today comes live from the chapel of King's College, Cambridge. Well, the canticles are sung to the set composed in B minor by Hugh Blair, and the anthem is Lord, I Call Upon Thee, a setting of a selection of verses from the Psalms by Edward Bairstow. The service opens now with an introit by Percy Whitlock, Be still, my soul, for God is near.
Lovely, thank you.
Well, the broadcast is now underway. I wonder, aside from all the nerves, the preparation and the technology, is there also quite an important purpose for this programme, particularly amongst church and cathedral musicians, for maintaining a national standard?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't listen perhaps as much as I should do. I enjoy hearing what my colleagues are doing. I sometimes feel that people are too critical of what they might hear, because to me this is, dropping in on the day, see what's going on. And I know that sometimes it doesn't go as well as I would like, but tomorrow's another day and we pick up the pieces and on we go. And so for my colleagues in other places, I enjoy listening to what they're doing, but I try and begin from that starting point of being supportive, because I know that there are so many things that go on. You cannot control which child might be ill. You can't control which lay clerk might have a tickly throat. You can't control how your personnel can change on the morning of a broadcast. But if you're working at a high level and your team is operating every day, well, then people move, and some people go on the bench and some people come out from the reserves, and on you go. That's the nature of the beast.
To me, it's very, very important. I remember as a chorister being involved in broadcasts and listening and feeling very excited to hear what other places were doing. And that certainly grew more and more for me through my life. I think there's the sense of tradition with it. First of all, because it's the longest running outside broadcast in the world, having started in October 1926. So there's that sense of history behind it, that routine in people's lives. There's that sense of timelessness in terms of the language. While it is, at its heart, a religious service, it's also a lot of music in it. And I think whether you're religious or not, you can still enjoy and appreciate the choral music that is part of Choral Evensong.
It sort of gets in the blood, really. And to have the privilege of coming to places like King's and hearing the best choirs in the country, being able to bring this sort of music to the wider listening audience is a real privilege.
Well, no more King's College, Cambridge, because I'm now in Rochdale, in the north of England, and I'm just making my way to the Town Hall, which recently opened to the public after a 4-year renovation. And it really is, on the outside as well as the inside, one of the finest examples in the country of Victorian Gothic architecture and artwork. But I've not come here to look at the pillars or the ceilings. I'm here to see and listen to the 4-manual 53-stop Binns organ, built for this hall in 1913, and really one of the last great town hall organs to be built in the industrial north before the impact of the First World War really changed everything so much. I'm meeting Gordon Stewart, who is certainly no stranger to this organ, or to the role of town hall organs, as for 30 years he was organist at Huddersfield Town Hall, as well as having been organist of both Manchester and Blackburn cathedrals, with an extraordinary legacy of choral directing, broadcasting and concert work that has taken him all over the world. So Gordon, are these town hall organs simply because they're in a town hall, or is there something fundamental about the character of these instruments? And I'm thinking particularly town hall organs in the north of England.
Well, most of the great town hall organs are in the north of England. And if you think about it, you can go all the way from St George's Hall, Liverpool, to Manchester, to Huddersfield, to Leeds and to Hull. And all of them have great town halls and all of them have wonderful organs. So there is something special about that. we tend to include, when we're talking about this, we include Sheffield and Birmingham, but don't tell Birmingham, we think of them as north. And there's a reason that they're there. You could trace this whole town hall thing back to the Industrial Revolution. And there's no doubt in my mind that following the death of Handel in the 1750s, you then get choirs very soon after his death. There were these festivals singing the oratorios of Handel. This links in beautifully with the Industrial Revolution, where the mill owners and the mine owners realised that the people who were working there needed something more than just their job. And they saw setting up, you can do it with male voice choirs in Wales, you can do it with brass bands, male voice choirs in choral societies in the north of England. Now, the thing about all those choirs is, and those brass bands, they need somewhere to perform. So what do? You do something that's not done anywhere else in the world. You build your council offices and you make them very splendid, and you add on to that a concert hall. You won't find that anywhere else. And you find these wonderful concert halls like Leeds and Huddersfield and Hull with a huge amount of space for a choir of 200 people, but they didn't have orchestras available. That was much more a London-based thing. So what did you do? You wanted to do these oratorios. You put in a great big concert organ, and it was designed to be the thing that accompanied those choirs. And that's what makes music making in the north so exciting at that time.
So you're really saying it's thanks to Handel dying that we've got the northern town hall organ tradition?
Well, we've certainly got that oratorio society. And of course, what grew out of that? I mean, how long do you want to sing the Handel oratorios? Well, you don't, because that develops then, and you get that whole school of writing. I mean, they used to say that Parry was going to set the whole Bible to music because he was being asked to write these oratorios. But then they started inviting, Mendelssohn to write Elijah, or the first performance of the Stabat Mater at Dvorak. These were in Britain.
And I suppose this is unique then because it's the north of England, the home of the Industrial Revolution. This is where the money is and that level of civic pride that was emerging in the 19th century. Is that part of the story?
I think that's part of the story, but I also think the generosity of the mill owners and mine owners, because they knew that it was in their interests. I mean, if you wanted to take it to its basic mark, you would say that setting up a male voice choir keeps the men out of the pub. It gives them something more to do and be creative. And it's a remarkable thing. I mean, we should be aware of it today, the importance of the arts in the life of all people, not just the wealthy.
But if we think about the purpose, the sound, the tonal qualities of these organs, so those big halls like Huddersfield and Leeds, as you were saying, they're there to accompany big choirs, there to provide the substitute of an orchestra. This organ here in Rochdale, built at the beginning of the 20th century, before the First World War, is Binns now doing something different? This isn't then your rank and file town hall organ?
Well, I would say, I think Binns was just one of the greatest organ builders who ever lived. And
really?
I think the quality of the workmanship and the engineering of these organs is just astonishing. I mean, he invented the most wonderful Binns patent pneumatic action. And I play on an organ fairly regularly, where the repetition of this pneumatic action is quite remarkable. And it's exactly as it was the year after this organ, 1914. This was his engineering. That's what makes the reliability of these organs quite something. And then he was open-minded. You have to think that in the town halls, if you did those town halls in the north, those big organs in the north, you would do Father Willis at Liverpool. Well, what did Manchester then do? Oh, well, they decided they would go French, and they had a big Cavai Cole organ, which was rebuilt by Cavai Cole to be even bigger. And then you go to Huddersfield, which bought a second-hand Father Willis from Wales, and then you go to Gray and Davidson at Leeds, and you go to the local builder, Foster and Andrews, building a huge organ in Hull, and Hale at Birmingham. And another wonderful organ, Cavai Cole, destroyed tragically in a fire in Sheffield. So here's this very clever man, Mr. Binns, who'd been apprenticed as an organ builder, had great ideas of engineering, but he also had ears, and he was listening to that sound of the Schulze organ in Doncaster Parish Church, this big Schulze organ with a kind of voicing that was based on the principal sound. And you hear it on an organ like this. You hear that sound.
So there are your diapasons on the grade.
Well, yeah, but then that's not even the big diapason, Mark. Those are the two smaller diapasons. When you have the big diapason, now I argue that he is in a tradition of building diapason choruses, where when you add the 4-foot and the 2-foot and the mixture to that, you are building the sound in the same way that on any classical organ you would. Now, there are organs that come later, in the 1930s particularly, where that was not the style. Harrison's are different, Norman and Baird are different.
Well, hang on, why is then Binns going this direction? Because I understand that he was very heavily influenced by Schulze, as you say. So this is coming from perhaps more a German style. But he's going in that direction where perhaps Willis or Harrison's might be similar results, but going in a different direction.
Different results, and trying to do a different thing. And you don't on a Father Willis organ, you don't think that pulling out the open diapasons, the 4-foot, the 2-foot, and the mixture, you don't expect to get a sound like this.
Who described the difference? Why was that not a Willis or a Harrison?
Because that is a fully developed chorus, what we would call in this country a diapason chorus or a principal chorus. And if you are playing on a Harrison organ, the way you build things up is completely different. It is not designed. This can happily play Bach.
And if I'm looking at the stops here, would I be right in thinking that there is then, perhaps because of Schulze, a kind of German influence? Because I can see we have a lot of Lieblich diapasons, Lieblich, which Schulze introduced,
yep.
And there are some German-sounding stops. I mean, is this kind of an English take on a German design that Binns is giving us?
Nobody's ever asked me that before. I think that Binns was an English organ builder in an English tradition, building an organ starting with its principal sounds, but then he does things which I think, and nobody's ever discussed this with me, but I'm now convinced that the other organs that he was affected by were the Sheffield Cavaille and the Manchester Cavaille. Because when you go to the string sounds, and no doubt people will say, well, yeah, you could do that with all sorts of organ builders, but can you really?
So you're on the swell now.
This is the swell. Here are the swell strings. But listen to this. This is the solo. He calls it violin and cello. He might have called it one of his gambas.
Now, to me, that sounds very open, very powerful. Are we talking French here?
I think we are. And I think that there is influence from that, from those Cavaille. I mean, if he was influenced by Schulze, why was he not influenced by Cavaille? And I find that when you have the 8-foots and you just bring on the strings from the whole organ, what interests me is a comment that was made by the French organist André Marchal, that on the Cavaille at Saint Clotilde was that when you had the strings and the foundations on, when you added the oboe to that, it did not take over.
So you've just added the oboe, I couldn't hear it.
No, exactly. And if you do it with some of the grate on, like this, then you get that sound that César Franck, for instance, is always asking for, that is the foundations with the oboe. Now, is that a quality sound of what? I mean, I just think this is Rolls-Royce with a Renault influence. This is to me just...
Well, are we getting it wrong? Are we trying to establish the influence of Binns, but actually, never mind Schulze, never mind Cavaillé, Binns is his own man?
Exactly right, Mark. I think he was. The quality of the voicing. Listen, we haven't even...
Right, let me take this further then. I don't want to give too many sort of romantic regional cliches here, but we are in the north. Binns is a Yorkshireman. This is the industrial heyday. He's come from that factory background, mass-producing background. Is this kind of, the robust, no-nonsense Yorkshire approach to building an organ? Is that actually what we've got here?
I think in a sense you do, because I think it matches the north of England perfectly. That sort of, the no-nonsense, you're right, and total reliability.
But what's he playing on it? So those sort of sounds, big 8-foot sound, we might think it's French, we might just think actually it's Binns. Musically, what is he wanting to do? Is he following the demands of performance and music, or is he opening the door to new possibilities for the performers and the musicians?
I don't think that he was doing new things in the way that some other builders were. I think he's much more in a tradition. And I think that you could look at a small 3 manual by Binns and then say to me, what would the next stop be if he had another one? And I would tell you, because this is just the development of that. There is nothing about this that would not be on a smaller Binns, and you can almost see that, at this point you add an orchestral oboe, which wouldn't be there if it was smaller. But there's nothing else that changes.
But that surprised me, because I think if I'm coming to a town hall organ, I'm thinking, oh right, transcriptions, it's got to have all of the orchestral sounds, it's got to do what W.T. Best would do. You're saying not in this case.
Yeah, well, I think I am, because this is not a Willis. And, there were these schools of organ building, and I think that Binns belongs in that classical style of Gray and Davidson.
But on high pressure.
Yeah. It's there to project, but then when you first go to hear some of the historic organs in Germany, you have an idea of what the sound of the Principal 8 on the Great will be, and then you play it, and you think, but it's not a million miles away from Lewis. It's organ building, and the scales might vary, but the actual sounds. And here, what excites me is that when you add a 4-foot, you do not sound as if you've added an octave coupler. It's a development of the harmonic series.
Can you demonstrate? I mean, we'd love to hear sort of more of these stops. And I mean, I do notice there are an awful lot of 8-foot stops here.
Well, yes, there are, Mark. But I mean, before we do that, every one of these flutes on this organ, every one is different. Now, if you looked at them, you would say, well, they look pretty well the same to me. But actually, just listen to this. Here's the 8-foot flute of the Great. Now listen to the 4-foot. And compare that to this. Or compare that to the swell. These are just voice. This is the orchestral flute from the solo. Every one of those, they are absolutely stunningly beautiful. The quality of the voicing, the evenness of the voicing is just fantastic.
But wasn't Binns also, in terms of increasing the pressure, allowed him to do something particular with the reeds?
The reeds are fiery, and I mean, I think the reeds are very exciting, and the boxes are always good. The swell boxes are always good. I mean, that's an exciting sound. Here's the great trumpet. The clarion. So when they're on together, swell reeds. The quiet clarinet reeds. Listen to this. This is the corno di bassetto, and this
On the solo.
on the solo, an organist would say that's to die for. And then you have the clarinet on the choir.
I mean, that is luxury, having two clarinets so distinctive on the same organ.
Absolutely.
I mean, it is a beautiful sound.
They're all beautiful. And then, once you've had the great reeds and you've done this, you think, well, what can I do more?
The tuba on the solo.
Have you heard one sound on this organ that is not just beautifully voiced, beautifully balanced? You can do all the transcriptions you want with those.
I mean, so that's why it will still work. I
It
mean,
would work
this is still a
beautifully.
transcription organ. You can.
It-
I mean, basically,
I don't
it
think
can
it's
do
a
anything.
It can do anything. Yeah. I mean, I think people.
And that's unique. I mean, well, it's not unique, but it's clever. I mean,
has-
it's not common. Put
I
it that
would-
way.
Exactly. I think that the classical organs, the Gray and Davidsons, would not have a lot of these quiet colours. But he doesn't compromise on the basic organ sound of principal choruses. Interestingly, and we haven't mentioned this, we're talking about bins in the north, but one of the most recorded organs in the early days of recordings on disc was an organ in London from 1912 at the Kingsway Hall, which was a fabulous organ, and you can hear that on recordings. All sorts of people played there. In Cambridge, when I was teaching there were certain bits of repertoire. I would say to the student, if we're going to play this, can we go to Queen's College and use the bins, because that is just perfect for this music. So there were bins. There were bins in Africa. I mean, he was exporting as well as building here. He was big. I don't understand why he is not always thought of as being up there. Because if you come and play here, if you go to Nottingham, to the Albert Hall there, these are just, by any standards, fantastic instruments.
So you would put him with the Willises, the Harrisons, the Lewis, the Walkers?
Absolutely. Here's an instrument which I think, in many ways, is the perfect recital instrument.
This one here?
Yeah, because I don't see what there is that I want to play in a programme. Okay, there are not lots of mutations. You'll find a 12th, but you won't find an Hazard or a tierce. But for so much of the repertoire, the clarity of this sound, but then the fiery reeds, and then the stunning quiet colours, and then those wonderful flutes. What more do you want, Mark?
So let's talk of this nationally. The organ here in Rochdale Town Hall, are we saying, or are you saying, that this is an organ of national, even not international significance?
Oh, international.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Here in Rochdale?
Here in Rochdale. Oh, no, I've absolutely no doubt of that. I mean, there's a recording just been made of Darius Battywaller playing the Whitlock Sonata. There is nowhere that...
On this?
There is nowhere that would sound better than it sounds here. It just fits it perfectly. But I've played programs here with French music, with German music, with American music, and the colours that I've needed have been here. And when it's not the perfect colour, everything is so well voiced that it just changes to fit in with whatever style you're playing. So yeah, I would say, I really do believe this is one of the great organs.
Well, Gordon, could you play something that, for you, brings out some of the colours of this organ?
Well, the temptation would be to play something very loud and very flashy. I would love to play something that uses really some of the beautiful quiet colours, particularly the corno di bassetto of the solo and the swell strings. And this is an arrangement of a Scottish tune done for me by Noel Rosthorne, and the tune is Will You Now Come Back Again?
Well, Gordon Stewart, thank you ever so much indeed for doing this. Fascinating. Thank you very much. Well, that's all for now. Next time, I talk to Catherine Deanish-Williams about her role as president of the Cathedral Organists Association and some of the pressures that both cathedral and church organists face today. So until then, from me, Mark O'Brien, goodbye.